Howdy. I want to give a little video update here today about where things are at since yesterday. I apologize if the house is noisy, but the kids are playing. There's video games and stuff going on. So yesterday I put a quick video about how I finished the nut slots. And honestly, I used the V file a little further than I should have, so there wasn't much left to do with my filing strategy. But real quick about that, I used these feeler gauges, and I had a couple here, the 18 thousandths, the 14 thousandths, and I think 11. 11, where'd the 11 go? I had 11 thousandths here. So I used those, and with the belt sander running, I roughed the edge on the belt sander with like 50 or 80 grit, and it just put a little bit of roughness on the edge. And so the 18 thou is how I cut the G string slot. No jokes. The 14 thou is how I cut the B string slot, and then the 11 is how I cut the high E string slot. But I also want to follow up because I mentioned how I use sandpaper then for the wound strings, because once you get above 18 thousandths, like 200ths or so, I don't do it that way. So I did was I took a piece of 180 grit, fold it in half, check with my calipers, and that came to, what was it? About 16 thousandths. About 16 thousandths. So what happens then is you need to cut a slot for your D, your E, and your A. And I forget, I think it was, don't quote me on this, but 28 thousandths and 38 thousandths and 48 thousandths. Give or take. Give or take a couple here and there. So what I do to make that happen then is, if this is 16 thousandths and I need 28 thousandths, then I grab my 12 thousandths feeler gauge and I wrap the sandpaper around it nice and tight, and that becomes my nut slot file. So it's simple add subtract. When I need to do my 38 thousandths slot, I use a 22 thou feeler gauge and the same sandpaper, then I slot that way. And then I didn't have the right one to do the low E string, so what I did was I sandwiched a 20 thou and a 12 thousand together to make a 32 thousandths. And again, the two of those go together. And so that gives me the right thickness, and it kind of rounds out the bottom. I'm not worried about having a perfectly semicircle bottom to the slots, but you want to have it pretty close in there, and that's going to get it pretty darn close. You don't want a V notch that's pinching the wound strings, and you don't want a big shallow notch that's going to let the unwound strings wave around in there. So the unwound need a nice tight fit. The wound need enough, especially if you're a tremolo user, you want to watch that especially. And if you're a tremolo user, then you want to just not use only the 180. You want to repeat this then with like 320, maybe even 600, and kind of polish those slots a little bit. I didn't get into higher grits. They're cut right where I want them. I did overcut the high E. I'm going to go back and readdress that. So I did is I took one of my nut blanks and I sanded some shavings off, put some bone dust right in the high E slot, retaped it, and one little drop of super glue, crazy glue. It's the CY glue, they call it. It doesn't matter what brand, but you want the CY glue. It's got the stuff that will make you go blind if you're not careful with it. It's got cyanoacrylate. That's the stuff that'll like bond instantly. And what it does is it takes the bone dust and it turns it into like reformed bone, almost. It's the next best thing. So I'll readdress the high E slot because I just got a little too hard on it, and so I got a little buzz. The other strings are right where they want to be. I was addressing the action last night, so everything else is going along pretty well. Then I'll be shaping the nut. Once I get the slots all where they want to be, then I'll take the Dremel to it, and I'll start lowering the rest of the nut down. I'll start radiusing the sides, put a little shoulder on them nicely. I'll also make sure that as I'm doing that, I also like to just round the nut off front to back a little bit. Not a lot, but I see they do that with the stock nuts. It's a little bit profiled back. So I'll do that just to make it look like a nice, pretty nice job. It won't be perfect with all that. But I'll take the Dremel to it all, and then I'll go back over it with like a little sanding block, something even smaller, a little sanding block and a little bit of sandpaper, and I'll go over the whole thing and try to just smooth the Dremel marks all out. And then I'll take it and polish slightly up to probably like a 600 grit. I'll go like 180, 300, 600 is probably where I'll stop. I don't see a need to go much more than that. So that's the rest of the nut treatment. Got to do a little bit of that. That's all in the works. And then graphite in the slots. A little bit of graphite. I always do that as I'm finishing off there. So that brings me down then to the bridge is the second part of what I'm going to talk about today. So the nut's all settled. The bridge has been in the process. There's a few things happening. So the first thing is I was unhappy when I was palm muting with the bridge adjustment screws. They were all too high. I measured them. They're about a centimeter, 10 millimeters. I've seen nice bridges that have incremented adjustment screws where the high and low E have shorter screws and then your D and G have longer screws. This is all just the same height and they're too high for everything. So I came up with an idea. I wasn't going to buy new screws because I couldn't find for sure the source that I wanted. So I went to the hardware store. The size of the threads is 3M, number 3 metric. I got these little nuts. So what will happen is I'll thread the nut on. The nut gives me something as a guide that I'll grab onto that with pliers or fine vice grips, probably needle nose pliers. And I'll hold by the Allen wrench and I'll hold with pliers and I'll take this to the belt sander and use the belt sander as a grinder. I'll probably come down and grit a little bit like a 120. It's a tiny little surface, it'll remove stuff fast. So what I'm going to do is grind off about 3 millimeters for the E saddles and grind off about 2 millimeters for the middle string saddles. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's going to do a lot for comfort. I'll grind it, I'll wire brush a little bit and smooth it nice. But I'm going to make sure I use the belt sander carefully and get that nice and squared off so it has the right profile. The other thing I noticed that is the other reason why these things are uncomfortable is the top is very squared off where the hex head, where that fits in. It's very, very square. So I might take a wire brush to the top also of each one of these things individually. And the same thing, I'll hold it with needle nose pliers and I'll take it to the wire brush and I'll just brush the top there and round that because it really does have a sharp, or maybe I'll hand file it. Maybe I'll hand sandpaper. I don't know, but it needs a little TLC on that. That'll make it way more comfortable for palm muting or if your side of your hand rubs against the bridge while you're doing stuff. It really needs that. So that's the plan I have. I want to put the nut on first so that if I booger the threads, I'll thread the nut off and that should make the threads nice so it'll thread right back in. I have the action pretty well roughed in so I know about where these have to go. And I'll leave a little bit of leeway, in case the neck relief gets changed in the future or things get changed. I'm not going to take these all the way down to like 5 millimeters, but 7 millimeters on the outside saddles, and I think 7 millimeters on the inside, maybe 8. Say 7. 7 on the outside, 8 on the inside. I'm going to remeasure. But that's my plan for that. That's my plan for all that. Also in the bridge. So it got reinstalled. I screwed the screws down to they're all just snug. Not tight, but snug. As soon as you tighten them, it starts tweaking the bridge a little bit. So they're just snug. And then it's got the stainless steel sustain block from Guitar Fetish. This is the one, it says MIM Strat / Squire. It's shorter in depth. So what happens is there's a little bit of interference right on the corner here where the spring comes across the back of the body. What I'm going to do is I'm going to relieve a little notch there for the Dremel, for the middle spring. The Dremel with a sander wheel on it. A little bit right in here. It's not going to take much. A couple millimeters and only on the back side, not the whole distance. But what the treatment is this thing's going to get is it's going to get a hardwood wedge. This is a piece of walnut. It tapers from about a 1/4 inch to about a 1/2 inch. And that's going to get wedged in here, and that's how I'm going to block the tremolo. So it's oversized right now. I marked it. I'm going to go cut it with a saw quick, probably just a hacksaw, and cut this off. And it's going to get glued on the body side. And then I'll put it in there. I'm not going to drive it in hard. It'll just go in and get a couple taps with a mallet maybe. I'm not trying to drive it in hard and tweak anything. I thought about filling this with epoxy too. But this will be less permanent. I'm just going to glue it with Elmer's or something. Tap it in there. And then I'll take these springs out and let the string tension clamp that thing right in there. And then there's spring tension, that's a blocked bridge. With no spring tension, technically that thing could just fall out with no spring tension. That's why I want to glue it so it doesn't rattle around when I'm changing strings. Also, to hold on to a little bit of stratiness, I am going to install the middle spring back in, one spring only, and I'm going to loosen these because I really want that steel block bearing against the wood, not held by the strings, but against the hardwood block into the body. I do like that. I think this is a big reason why this guitar is ringing so much nicer right now. It sounds great unplugged. But I'm going to get that all situated there. Get the saddle height adjustment all situated. And the electronics are almost ready to go. I have some. That'll be a separate update on the electronics. This drives me nuts, by the way, having it strung to do some adjustments, and meanwhile I have the pick guard off to do other things, because it is a pain in the neck getting the pick guard back on. Even though this neck, it's a little more friendly on this than my other guitars, but when I go to put it back on, I also have a little trick I use so I can loosen the strings, take the neck off, and not let these strings get all tangled and messed up. I'll take the neck off right with these strings are only a week old, and then I'll mount it all back up. That's a different thing though, I'm not getting into that today. So I'll be finishing that last nut slot finally, nut shaping. Got a little bit to do to get this bridge blocked and get that just the way I want it. Saddle height screws. And then we're into electronics, mount the pick guard, final setup. Final setup. We're a couple days out from having this thing all wrapped up finally. I've been away from a while, so it's good to get some stuff moving here. So that's it for now. Check in next time. This thing's getting almost done. I'm looking forward to plugging it in and actually really playing it. Take care.